Okay, we're going to hear from a contractor now. Where's John? John, okay, come and take the stage.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, well, I want to start with a bit of a statement, perhaps a vision or even a thought. Call it a belief. People aren't lazy. They have goals that don't inspire them. I'll say that again. People aren't lazy. They have goals that don't inspire them. So I'm guessing there's a few people out in the audience that are thinking, where's this guy going with this? And what has this got to do with achieving value for efficiency? Well, I'm not going to unpack it just yet, but my hope is, after I spend a bit of time talking to you, hopefully 15 to 20 minutes, and we conclude, most of the room will have some connectivity with what I'm discussing, and perhaps some emotional attachment to it. Where am I going with this? So when Andrew spoke to me about 6 months ago and said, would you come to the Construction Summit and give a discussion on productivity and achieving value through efficiency, I thought, blimey, what a wide, vast topic that is. Where do I start? So initially I thought, well, the one thing I know people aren't going to want to hear about is Willmott, Dixon, what we do and how great we are, because I think that'd be quite a big turn-off and the room would empty fairly quickly. And then I thought, well, I'm pretty aware of most of the stuff that goes on in our industry, whether it be lean principles or collaboration or off-site manufacture, modern methods of construction, whatever that is we want to talk about. And then I thought, well, I'm full of a room of leaders from different parts of our industry that probably know as much, if not more of that than me. So why am I talking about that? So I continued to wrestle. And I went out and done a few things, and I came back to something which is a lot more simple, closer to my heart, and something I wanted to speak to you about today, which is people. You might be wondering, well, what about people? Well, my view is, my belief is, in the backdrop of all the good things that we talk about as an industry and everything going on around us, I think people are important, and I think the culture within our industry needs to change to focus on how we inspire people to do great things in our industry on the backdraft of some great processes, ways of working, and procedures. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey of how I came up to that conclusion and some of my thought process where I went with that. So my starting point was saying, well, let's have a look at the industry and how it actually does perform. So went back to the literature which kind of has benchmarked our industry and perhaps given us most recent recommendations. So I go back to Sir Michael's report in 1994, which said that we need to collaborate, do a bit more framework activity, and partner. All great recommendations, all things that I fully endorse, and so does the business I work for. So that was great. Then we went to 1998 with Mr. Egan, who took it from a client's perspective, and the perspective was we had to take out waste in our processes and do some of the things that Sir Michael had talked about. And then more recently, we have the Farmer Review, and that says that we need to modernize or die. And it got me thinking, 20-something years on, and where are we and what have we done differently? And I kind of say that in the backdraft of I'm not belittling or working against any of the great stuff we do as an industry. I fully agree in framework activity. I fully agree with collaboration, collaborative planning, the principles of lean, off-site manufacture. I get all of these things. However, one thing did stand out to me is actually from a productivity point of view and to drive efficiency, we need to be more productive. We haven't really come that far. So what is it preventing us doing that? And I'm back to people. So I thought, blimey, well, I work in a part of the industry where I've got access to lots and lots of people. And I think what I'm about to talk about is we could talk about it in architectural practices or surveying practices as well as we can within a contracting organisation and our supply chain. But I picked on someone and something that was easily accessible to me. But upon my review, one thing that did jump out at me as a need to resolve something is that in a industry that's worth £100 billion a year, we spend £10 billion putting things right. So part of me says, well, before we look at how can we add value through being more efficient, shall we try losing some of our inefficiencies? Because if we think about skills gaps and all the other things that we talk about today, if we could take a portion of that and put that back into the front end, or us as contractors having to charge less because we cost more, what a better industry we would have and how we would add more value to our customers. But again, I get back to, when I think about that, is people. Because again, we've got the processes. So if we're making error in design, we've got BIM. We should be resolving that. Within our business, we've got hundreds of processes and management strategies. But actually, we're still making these mistakes, and we're still costing this amount of money. So this for me, was where the blockage was. So as I said, and actually, before I move on from that, so then we go and sort of say, well, what is that actually worth? What is value? Well, if £10 billion is a figure, 2,500 schools is the value that we could add by not making mistakes. So for me, it's really significant stuff, just doing it right first time. But we've got the processes and we've got the ways of working. So what did I do? Well, I want to introduce you to an individual, and that individual is Bob. I don't want to leave that on the screen for too long, at the fear of people having nightmares. But I went to see Bob, and the first thing I noticed with Bob, because Bob was a bricklayer who was working on one of our projects, was when I went to speak and firstly asked him his name, and would he help me with a piece of work I'm doing for Construction Excellence Southwest in terms of how do we make our industry more efficient and add value. And immediately, just by that engagement, I saw in Bob's eyes, blimey, there's someone who cares about me and wants to talk to me and engage with me. I thought to myself, well, that's quite strange, but if that helps, then great. So I started the conversation with Bob. So I said to Bob, why are you here? And I was quite disappointed by Bob's response. And he said, well, I'm here to do a job. I lay bricks. I'm bricklaying. And I sat back and thought, do you know, if I asked our customer that question, or he heard that question answered, I think they'd be disappointed. I'm disappointed, actually, because I think we're here doing a hell of a lot more. We're actually building a school, and that school's providing an education facility, and it's going to provide a huge community benefit, and it's there for our children and our communities, and it's going to bring great things to the world we live in. But Bob didn't know that, because Bob was building bricks, and no one had told him. So I said to Bob, so what is it we're trying to achieve? What have we got to get done by when, Bob? And Bob said to me, well, John, I've got to get 2 panels built by the end of the week. And I said, well, why is that, Bob? And Bob said, because that's what I've got to do to earn my wage. Bob wasn't aware that back in the site office, our site management team had a very complicated program which they put together with the supply chain through collaborative planning, but Bob wasn't aware of those targets. Bob was working separate to that. So I kind of reflected on that very quickly while I'm talking to Bob, and I thought to myself, do you know what? Bob isn't actually engaged. Bob isn't sharing our purpose. Bob isn't that inspired about what we're doing. Bob's just there doing his job. So I carried on the conversation, and we started talking about scaffold and access to the job, the workplace that Bob works in, and I'm glad to say it was nice, clean and tidy and well put together, and like the example we saw earlier. However, Bob told me about a better way of doing it, something that would make life easier for him. So I said to Bob, have you taken that to a supervisor? Have you spoken to one of our site managers? And Bob said, I'm a bricklayer. People don't listen to me. I'm just laying bricks. That's what I do. And I thought, do you know, that's not something I was surprised at, but again, disappointed by, because I thought we don't listen to Bob. We just assume we give him orders, he goes out and he does his job. So Bob, in a way, isn't respected. So I thought, well, let's raise the sort of tone of this. Let's get a little bit more enthusiasm into what this conversation's about. So I'm getting a bit depressed. And I said to Bob, so tell me something you've really enjoyed about this job, the site you worked on, and something great you've achieved. So Bob took me through a brickwork detail when he was building the coin and all the interfaces that went with that. I thought, that's really good. The guy's chuffed by what he's achieved. And I said, have you shared that with anyone? And he said, well, no, that's just my job. I'm the bricklayer. I just do it and I move on. And I thought, do you know what? We don't acknowledge Bob. We don't give him any recognition for the good things he does. But I tell you what we do. We come down very quickly and heavily on Bob when he does something wrong. That was the end of the conversation. I would like to think that Bob was a little bit more comfortable with the conversation than me, because I went away with some reflection, but pretty disappointed with how Bob had answered the questions. Was that Bob's fault? No, it wasn't. My own view on that is, via me to my management team, through our supply chain, down to Bob, we hadn't inspired Bob to be on message and understand what it is we were trying to achieve as a project. But when we think about £10 million worth of work that we do badly, is there any surprise that with Bob not in tune and going through the motions, we're not achieving great quality buildings and saving ourselves £10 billion as an industry? So you can see where my thoughts took me, and I thought, well, actually, if we focus on people and get the people inspired within our industry to do great stuff, hopefully these processes, working practices, alternative methods that we have come up with and innovated about, and I reiterate, I fully am behind. Hopefully we see some more value and benefit from them, because we stop wasting money on poor quality and poor delivery. So I reflected, I took that back to our business, and thought about some of the things we could and should do and have started doing. So, simple things, during inductions, which have in the past been about people like Bob coming in and us telling them where fire points are, the do's and don'ts, and where the welfare facilities are. How about sharing with them the inspirational things that we all get to see and hear about what the end use of that building is, what it's going to mean for the communities that they work in, the children that he has, etc., etc. Try and get him emotionally attached to the project rather than just assuming we will tell him what to do and he will go away and do it because he's getting paid to do so. So trying to get some emotional attachment with Bob. So that's something that we have started to do. And I think, well, actually, respect's an easy thing we talk about, and we tend to respect more upline than we do, dare I say it, downline and within our supply chain. So certainly as an organisation, recognising that and the importance of it, we have introduced as a business a professional etiquette charter and a behavioural guide which says respect's easy to achieve, but it's quite frightening when you read through it, even myself, how many things we don't do properly. And then when we start talking about how that impacts and affects other people, their motivation, their inspiration, their ability to want to do things well, we start thinking, blimey, that £10 billion is staring me in the face again. And I would hope within the next year we'll see our supply chain seeing some of the benefit of the way we treat and behave better around them and with them. And then we move into recognition, and we say it's very simple to say, well done for doing a good job. And more recently, we are doing that, whether that be through green cards or actually just ringing someone up when they are doing you a good job and saying, well done, because we feel we can, not that if I tell them well done and the claim comes in 6 weeks' time, how's that going to feel and how's that going to go down, so we avoid it. So those are a few things that we are doing as a business. So to go back to where I started, people aren't lazy, they just have goals that aren't inspiring. And I guess what I'm trying to get across in my messages today, I fully embrace and support all the great things we do as a great industry. But when I look at the facts and the figures, we spend too much time putting things right in amongst all those processes and great working methods. So something else has to be in play there. And I feel it's a lack of an inspired workforce, whether that's architects, technicians, surveyors, bricklayers like Bob, or even people like myself. And I think as leaders of the industry, we've got a bit of an obligation to start looking at this as a topic and trying to get more inspiration around the place and reducing what is a 10% issue, which probably wouldn't be sustainable in industries like manufacturing and the like. So I'll just leave you with one last thought before I stand down. The uninspired individual will achieve far less with process and technology than the inspired person without it. And on that note, I thank you.